December 5, 1945, 2:10 in the afternoon. 5 Navy TBM Avenger bombers lift off from Naval Air Station Fort Lauderdale on a routine over-water navigation exercise, the kind of training flight these pilots have completed a dozen times before. 2 hours later, the flight leader's voice comes over the radio, calm at first, then not. "We don't know which way is west. Everything looks wrong. By nightfall, all 5 aircraft are gone. 14 men, no wreckage, no bodies, no distress call after dark, and the rescue plane sent to search for them vanishes too." 80 years later, the Navy's official file still can't settle on why. The story of Flight 19 is more than a training accident. It's a case study in how a single moment of disorientation, compounded by weather, fading daylight, and a chain of small miscalculations, can turn a routine exercise into one of aviation's most enduring unsolved disappearances. This is a minute-by-minute account of what the record actually shows, and where, even now, it runs out. Flight 19 was a standard navigation training mission, the same kind flown weekly out of Fort Lauderdale. 5 TBM Avenger torpedo bombers, 14 crewmen in total, most of them still finishing flight training. The route was simple on paper: fly east over the Bahamas, drop practice bombs on a target wreck, continue further east, then turn north and finally west, tracing a long triangle back to base. Leading the flight was Lieutenant Charles Taylor, an experienced combat pilot with more than 2,500 flight hours, many of them in the Pacific during the war. On paper, he was the safest possible choice to lead 4 newer pilots through open ocean. The weather that afternoon was unremarkable at takeoff: some cloud, moderate wind, nothing that would have grounded a routine flight. That would not last. The outbound leg went as planned. The squadron reached the bombing range, dropped their practice ordnance, and continued on the second leg of the triangle. It was sometime after this point, roughly 90 minutes into the flight, that something changed. Another pilot training in the area overheard a radio exchange between Taylor and one of his students. Taylor's compasses, he said, weren't reading correctly. He believed the flight had drifted off course, and rather than being over the Bahamas as planned, he thought they were somewhere over the Florida Keys, hundreds of miles to the southwest of their actual position. It was the opposite of where they actually were. What followed was nearly 2 hours of radio transmissions, pieced together afterward from listening stations and other aircraft in range, showing a flight leader increasingly convinced he knew where he was, and increasingly wrong. Taylor ordered course changes meant to bring the squadron back toward Florida. Each change, based on his mistaken position, likely took the flight further out over open Atlantic water, away from land rather than toward it. Some of the younger pilots, according to overheard transmissions, questioned the heading. One suggested flying west, toward the sun, reasoning that west was where the coast should be. Taylor did not change course. As the afternoon wore on, daylight began to fail. Radio contact grew intermittent, garbled by distance and deteriorating weather. The last confirmed transmission, picked up faintly by a listening station, suggested the flight was preparing to have all aircraft ditched together when the fuel ran out, so that any survivors would be found in one place. After that, nothing. Within hours, the Navy and Coast Guard launched one of the largest air and sea search operations of the post-war period. Hundreds of aircraft and vessels combed the presumed area over the following days, covering hundreds of thousands of square miles of ocean. That same night, a Navy PBM Mariner flying boat took off from Banana River Naval Air Station to join the search. It carried 13 men. Roughly 20 minutes after takeoff, a merchant ship in the area reported witnessing an explosion and fire on the water, in the general vicinity of the Mariner's flight path. The aircraft was never heard from again. No confirmed wreckage from either Flight 19 or the search plane was ever recovered, despite the scale of the search that followed. Investigators would later note that the Mariner, nicknamed by some crews the Flying Gas Tank for its fuel vapor-related accident history, may have suffered an unrelated mechanical failure, a grim coincidence layered onto an already unresolved case. The scale of the search and the total absence of wreckage raises the obvious question: how does an entire squadron simply disappear in an area this heavily searched without leaving a trace? The Navy's own investigation would spend months trying to answer exactly that. The Navy Board of Investigation's initial report placed responsibility on Taylor, concluding that his mistaken belief about the flight's position had led the squadron fatally off course. It was a straightforward finding on paper: pilot error, compounded by failing light and deteriorating weather. Taylor's mother formally objected to that finding, arguing that her son had not been given a fair hearing and that mechanical issues with his aircraft's compass may have played a role from the very beginning of the flight. The Navy revisited the case and, in a decision unusual for the time, altered the official record. The cause was changed from pilot error to cause unknown. That distinction matters. It's not that investigators found an alternative explanation. It's that they concluded, after review, that the evidence didn't support blaming any single person with confidence. No wreckage meant no way to confirm whether Taylor's compass had genuinely failed, whether structural damage from the bombing run played a role, or whether a combination of small factors compounded into an unrecoverable situation once night fell over open water. In the decades since, numerous wreck sites in the region have been investigated and, one after another, ruled out as the resting place of Flight 19. Some searchers have simply never found anything to identify at all. The ocean floor in that stretch of the Atlantic is vast, and 1945-era navigation left a wide margin for error in exactly where a squadron might have gone down. What the official record shows, stripped of speculation, is this: a routine training flight, an experienced pilot who became convinced of a wrong position, a series of course corrections that very likely made things worse rather than better, and a night that closed in before anyone could recognize the mistake and correct it. Add to that a rescue aircraft that may have suffered its own unrelated catastrophic failure in the middle of the search, and you have two separate tragedies overlapping in the same dark stretch of ocean. Flight 19 didn't need a hidden conspiracy to become one of aviation's most famous disappearances. It needed disorientation, fading light, and an ocean big enough to keep its answers to itself, and 80 years later, it still has.